So lovely to be having this conversation, Catherine, um, with the frame of healing and exploring card 51 from the Cards for Life deck, healing. I know you've thought a lot about healing and worked with it as a process. Just by way of introduction, this is the first recorded conversation in Cards for Life, where there's always been an intention to dive a bit deeper into the concepts of the cards. And I've often thought about you with the healing card, because I experienced in a gathering, in a conference, you hosting a space about healing and how you understand it and like the components of healing. And I really took from that this kind of living systems view of healing. You said some things there that have stayed with me that we might sort of surface in the conversation. But yeah, just like to welcome you to the conversation. And would you like to say a little bit about yourself, however you feel to introduce yourself?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I can introduce myself in the context of healing and my interest in healing. And some of that goes right back to, infancy. And I was born with a congenital defect that meant I had to have surgery quite early on in just the first month or so of life. And that, as I look back, actually has made me more susceptible to certain types of problems and issues. And so just thinking about how we look after ourselves health-wise, for me feels like so fundamental and foundational to our relationship to healing more widely. And that can be different levels of the self, so the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, healing in terms of relationships, in terms of communities, the wider world, our environment as well. And one of the things that, in really drilling down into understanding more about healing, I found there was a lot of literature that highlights, particular modalities of healing. Yeah, so introduces this approach or that approach, but very little that was really about understanding healing as a set of principles that apply across any level of scale or system.
Mm.
So it was kind of through that I've landed on a set of core principles, if you like, around, so what are the self-similar mechanisms that we can observe in all living systems in terms of how they heal, and seeing that healing is an inbuilt, an innate dimension, if you like, or property of all living systems. And just staying with that thought is pretty awesome, right? So it means that everything has this inbuilt, innate capacity for its own healing.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for replaying that. So this shift from for you thinking about, well, healing often sort of confined to a set of modalities, but then actually thinking about it as principles universal to all living systems, complex systems, maybe.
Well, I like to think so. I mean, like, maybe it's a bit grandiose because obviously lots of people have looked into healing from all sorts of, different angles. I'm currently on a introduction to homeopathy course, and so, Samuel Hahnemann's work and all sorts of amazing thinkers have contributed to this space. So it might feel a little bit sort of, I don't know, to kind of think, well, is there something that we haven't seen yet? Might feel a bit grandiose, but I actually think that the challenge is that healing, which means wholing, yeah, like
Holy, yeah.
becoming more whole, and this interestingly, we have that expression hale and hearty, yeah, which means whole and hearty.
Yeah.
Hale and hearty. So it's a lovely old expression that kind of describes so much in just a few words.
Mm.
but yeah, that we kind of have missed something really essential about what healing is, not just our body's healing, not just healing in this, and I'll talk to you about, kind of self-healing systems and thinking about systems as they have a self-healing mechanism. And sadly, that word is pretty much reduced to just talking about concrete and building materials and
Right.
IT systems, as
Yeah.
opposed to actually, wow, if we really tap into that and understand how do we participate with that. I think it has many of the keys to regeneration are held within how healing works.
I love that. Many of the keys to how regeneration, many of the keys to regeneration are held in how healing works. Yeah.
Mm.
And and so we might move more into how healing works in a moment, but just to pass over that again of kind of what healing is, I really like how you talked about healing as wholing just then, like becoming more whole. And in a sort of systems view, I think of uh, more and more complex layers of systems are emerging all the time, whether from seed to tree or on any scale where we choose to look. Um, because as you were speaking to that before you came to that, I was thinking, okay, so maybe healing is like a dynamic of balance, like homeostasis. It's systems um, kind of coming back to their balance, and so being in balance in some sense is like a state of health. But actually, um, what I hear from you, I think, is a more important framing. Is healing is about that process of becoming more whole. I think there's a dynamic of balance
Mm.
within that all the time.
Yeah,
Systems
yeah.
are seeking balance through feedback,
Mhm.
sitting on the edge of chaos, as we all are. But I think that's crucially different to the sort of expansive or emerging sense of kind of wholing, becoming more whole. So maybe as we move through stages in our life, um, could you say
This
anything about that kind of process? Because I have a
definitely.
sense of like kind of cracking from one level open to the next.
Mhm.
There are these points of birth which require, healing of the tissue of the body, of the psyche. Um, yeah.
Definitely, and I think it's really important to sit with this for a moment, because often people associate we in a kind of modern medicalized society, we associate healing with maybe some sort of a reset button, or
Mm.
actually in healthcare systems don't really talk about healing very much at all. It's more about treatment. But there's still this kind of sense that we've picked up from somewhere that healing, and maybe it also comes through a kind of religious association of something that God bestows on us, like we're worthy of healing, or we've prayed enough, or we've got enough faith for it, that somehow it's given to us, or that somebody is going to, some practitioner or somebody else. So this, it's very kind of, just paraphrasing here, but quite Piscean in terms of like it's going to come from something bigger and greater and more wise than me,
Right.
and I'm going to be on that receiving end, and this, I don't want to make that wrong, but there's something around like what you were saying about those, like cracking open almost to another level, which is ultimately about kind of an evolutionary process happening. And, we wouldn't be here if we couldn't trust in the power of healing, think about all the generations that have gone before us to bring us here, um, and there's a kind of accrual of wisdom and knowing. We might not always see
Oh.
that or think that, but it's there, and we see that also in nature. So when a forest is under stress because of drought, um, it has ways of kind of remembering what to do when there's a lack of water. So it's not like the biggest trees just suck up all the water and everything else dies,
Mm.
which would make those remaining trees vulnerable the next time. Yeah. But the whole forest learns to conserve that water. And so in a sense, you can see that actually it serves as a reservoir kind of memory that then is part of our development and evolution. So the
Yeah.
more we can integrate from that experience, which is why, even if somebody feels like they've experienced something which almost kind of like a miraculous experience of healing, they still have to integrate that.
Mm.
Because what can happen is you kind of like experience something and then you're kind of back in the same situation again. And it's through that integration that we become more whole. We're able to take that really in, and then it's almost like we're operating from another level
Yeah.
of consciousness and awareness. And we still have some of the scars and things are still left, but that's kind of the residue of that learning and integration, I think.
Right. And that's in that reservoir, that memory actually
Yeah.
of being primed for circumstances or events that require healing in the future, right? Like a drought or a tension or a trauma or a challenge of some kind that we have to heal from
Mm.
is in those scars. Like they are part of that reservoir of healing knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm sure if we could ask the scar tissue on our bodies, like what it knows, it
mm,
would probably have all sorts of amazing stories to tell us.
wow. Wisdom of God. Yeah, I really love that. And I got a kind of a feeling of or an image came to mind as you were speaking of like a cascade of healing, a healing wave that we're at
Mm,
the kind of bow of, um, given all of the cumulative healing in our lineage, uh,
mm,
not just in our sort of more parochial human lineage, but of life itself. Um,
mm, mm,
that's a really beautiful and powerful image. And so there's a dimension there that I understand now of like healing, um, being deep in our memory, in the reservoir of our collective memory, the ability to heal. And I also heard you speaking to like healing coming out and through us, rather than being received from on high. So this little phrase on the card, healing is available. Um,
mm.
I think now I put that in the context of what you've been saying, it's like it's there to be drawn on.
Yeah. And I mean, like I have a faith-based background, so as far as I'm concerned, it's all a gift from Creator anyway. So it's kind of either way. It's something that's being gifted to all living things, that this capacity for healing. Yeah. So trusting in that and participating with it, and I think it brings us into uh, what are some of the kind of core conditions that we might be able to offer as a way of supporting that. And I think there are some core conditions that I would say is presence. Uh, so the capacity to really be with and observe as it is. Yeah. We can't really fully participate in healing unless we're able to be present to what's happening. And presence isn't about interrogating it or being kind of intrusive, but it is about being the being with and the noticing, and with that then so presence, love, and that might be basically the whole raft of heart-centered um, qualities that we can bring into a situation. So it may be gratitude, it may be compassion, it may be care, empathy, etc. And we shouldn't imagine that that doesn't also exist within the forest, right? Is that the forest is present, it can sense itself, and this sense of care is also expressed in terms of seeing where there is lack, or noticing that there is natural attractors happening, so within the mycorrhizal network, etc. So in some shape or form, even if we think of love as just simply like something is attracting, there's always a relational element to healing. There's always some things that are wanting to come together, or maybe not, or maybe go away, but there's some relational dynamic to healing which is also there. And then the third quality, I think, and this links to what we were saying around the integration, is around meaning. Like, so how do we process and kind of do some meaning making around that? And that's kind of almost banking the, you know, integrating the experience into that reservoir. So how we also sit with that, and I think that's often where those kind of circles, fireside circles, that sort of place is often a wonderful place where we can sort of gently be present with and experience compassion and do some of that meaning making. Yeah, that also needs to accompany that healing.
And about a particular kind of relationship somewhere in the system that we're part of, isn't it? We're making meaning about that, if I'm sort of hearing you right. Just share those principles, or almost do you call them like conditions for healing? Well, you talked about
Yeah, so I know that we language can, we use words in different ways, but for me it's like almost like some core conditions or attitude, like an attitude that I'm going to bring to something.
yeah
And then the principles are more like, okay, so how could I be working with the relational dynamic or the evolutionary, I mean, think about coherence as a term, it's like through integration, we kind of arrive at a new level of coherence, or whatever else principles might be useful for me to, if I'm working, stuff for myself or with other people. It's like we can guide our attention towards some of those different principles, but bringing those qualities, that attitude of presence, love, meaning to each of those.
yeah presence, love, and meaning, and the relational there in the love. I love to think about, yeah, bringing these principles into, well, it makes me think how little they are in um, our approach to the spaces that we design, the spaces that we create. And I like this idea of had this word salutogenic. This mean like health-centered, and this idea of
Mm,
salutogenic design, even public
mm,
spaces or homes, when we think about architecture and like how are we creating space for presence and relationship, um, and
yeah.
conditions for meaning making as well is also about how we're creating time and sort of freedom
Mm,
to
mm,
connect and have that capacity to sort of explore. Yeah, thank you for sharing these. And there's this little quote by Wendell Berry that I've got here that I'd like to share, and then maybe we sort of explore the kind of the interpersonal. And before this conversation, you were sharing a little bit about healing and resonance, and so maybe we could talk a bit about sort of how it happens, moving beyond these principles.
mm,
Um, this is in the context of internal family systems, which I've really been enjoying exploring, and I really love it because actually maybe this sort of sets a bit of a direction for the conversation. The multi-scalar nature or view of internal family systems, that we have this collection of parts that are sort of sub-personalities. And when we explore in that way, we start to see outwardly as well of us at the human scale as parts within the world body that are needing to connect and share meaning and find relationship in healing, holding ways. So I've been finding it really powerful for myself, and I also just find it a fascinating. It feels very true or truthy, as Timothy Morton might say, internal family systems, because it feels similar, multi-scale kind of fractal architecture that we see in living systems. As Wendell Berry writes, healing complicates the system by opening and restoring connections among the various parts. In this way, restoring the ultimate simplicity of their union. The parts are healthy insofar as they're joined harmoniously to the whole. Only by restoring the broken connections can we be healed. Connection is health. And so that evokes for me this connecting with the greater whole, this inner connecting, and healing and holding. And then, of course, with Cards for Life, the sort of flavor of the project is about reconnecting inner and outer work and humans and nature. Those are the two forms of reconnection that I talk about. And in this conversation with you, I think about that connection actually, as kind of synonymous with healing,
Mhm.
inner and outer efforts, connecting in that way, and humans and nature, and sort of reholing there, which I think is what, the regenerative movement and Buzz is about. Um, yeah, what comes up for you there, Katherine, when we move to sort of healing at multiple scales, and maybe between those kind of crucial pathways as well, between um, nature, the sort of living systems out there, and us.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think, I mean, the word connection is a really interesting one, and one that, you know, um, I think sometimes can be helpful to challenge, because if in the world today, if I feel connected to everything, that can also feel overwhelming, right?
Right.
And yeah, so so it's something around recognizing there is a relationship between everything, and a relationship that allows for flows, and um, the capacity to also move away from things that maybe don't feel salutogenic. Yeah, that
Mm.
might not want to, feel stuck in, right? So I think there's a principle that I sense around health and healing, which is also about freedom. And that's about freedom to intuit the contexts and the situations that feel healthful or not, right? Um, and, so nobody can say, Tom, tomorrow show up 9 o'clock, you're going to be, healed whether you like it or not on this, like so it's not something that, I don't think there's many people that feel like it's something that you can force on somebody, right? So there is definitely this sense of like, how do we tune into, how do we grant ourselves and each other the freedom to figure out what's needed, given that each person will have different needs in relation to what they're exploring, that there may be commonalities, there may be common themes, and yet we need the space to be able to sense into that for ourselves. So that I would just add that as a bit of a caveat, really.
I really like that you've highlighted that, because I think it's easy to get drawn in the direction of more connection, more healing. And there is a kind of spirit of more, 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 which is, the great acceleration, which I hope we're going to start see turning into the
Mm,
great deceleration. Idea I've been playing
yeah.
with this morning, but I think
And
it's really important that you highlight that, of like, um where are we creating space as well, and what are we saying no to and moving away from, and not just connecting more and
yeah,
more.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because often, when maybe we've each experienced this in our different ways, but often it's about the removal of something, that's been masking, you know, us being able to actually deal with something or whatever it may be, that we need to be able to remove certain things as part of the healing process as well, right? So
Mm.
how do we just, allow for some shedding? And I think, again, it's important to understand healing is within the context of seasons and cycles, and ultimately death, right? so um but healing can be happening right up until that moment of death, because it it has the capacity to work on different levels. So I often say, somebody might be cured but not experience healing, or they might not be cured but they might have healing, like healing in the relationships with their family, or with themselves or whatever it may with their past. A sort of being at peace with, being at one with.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just taking that in that there is that arc of, new life to death, and there are the seasons and cycles that feel like they kind of um move within that there are times for shedding as well, sort of smaller deaths, through the
Mm.
seasons of any sort of life arc. And um but I found it quite evocative, you talking about like some often when something's removed, that's been kind of masking a situation, then healing can occur.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it sort of pulls my mind towards what might be removed that could allow healing in this time. Do you have any thoughts about
Mm.
that? um
I, mm.
I'm
I
kind of
just okay. I can respond to that in a sense that I think a lot of the ways that we respond to things going on in the world and in life um, are often part of a bigger narrative. Like we're kind of expected to respond in a certain way or have this view or whatever it may be, and useful or as those things may be or not, right? So we recognize that, you know, emotion is a very powerful force and can be used or utilized or guided in certain ways, right? And I think that the ultimate effect of a lot of that is that it actually gets us out of contact with what is really happening for us, or what is really in our field. Yeah. When everything's in your field, it's almost like it becomes really hard to sense into what is genuine and authentic. So
Mm,
yeah, and then our energy kind of goes all over the place.
yeah,
So really tuning into and there is a sense of like, how do I quieten the noise down enough that I can actually really hear my own intuition here, or I can really sense into, like, maybe I'm overextending myself emotionally, because I feel I should really care about this situation, and maybe that's not directly within my gift right now,
mm,
and that could be okay. So I think that I see a lot of people who, and this I guess, so within an activist community, that are very broken in themselves, almost through this kind of overextension, or like you kind of throw all your energy out here, and actually um, there's kind of a disconnection with, like, well, what am I actually authentically feeling right now, and how
mm,
do I want to be with that? So and I think we experience that in all kinds of contexts. I just used that, as just one example,
yeah,
um, but where it can feel like, oh, we're really engaged in healing, and almost exactly the opposite is happening.
yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really powerful, and it brings to mind also sort of a contrast, and maybe there's a balance, or a path to sort of navigate there, um, as we're set to see more crises and greater suffering unfold, or just there's enough in this time right now, um, enough to be overwhelming. I mean, um, and also like I really hear what you say in the sort of activist community, and even those that are ostensibly working for regeneration and burning out, trying to make as much impact as possible.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's probably less of an issue, but there are also like people that are going very much inward, and can end up, we can end up obsessing about our own healing, um,
Yeah.
which feels kind of getting lost a bit in the other direction, or extending too
Yeah.
much in the other
Yeah.
direction. And on the card it says heal yourself to heal the world, and I
Hmm.
think that could be taken a little bit too much in that sort of direction. But I think that's also quite a hard challenge to one of the activist sort of sensibility, to say, well,
Yeah.
I must heal the world first, like I must do the outer work
Hmm.
first, but when that starts to come at expense of the self. But I hear you saying that, almost back to those conditions and ways of attending, being present. I like you talking about the forest is present, it can sense itself. So when we can
Hmm.
sense ourselves,
Hmm.
are you kind of saying that from that place we can notice where to attend? uh
Yeah. Yeah. So I think just to um recognize that we can get pulled in either direction, that we can get lost in everything out there, or we can get lost in everything in here, right?
mm,
And there's a kind of unbalance around that, because of course we all exist within contexts that are meaningful and important for our lives, that we we need to, that flow of inner and outer needs to be nurtured and nourished. Um, and so it may be that in attending to that, and then with each other as well, because we can each get into our little own echo chambers. Yeah. And actually it's something around, as we are sitting with um, maybe a particular challenge that we're facing, but increasingly what I like to invite people into is sit with a principle of healing that we can all notice, like, how is this already happening or wanting to show up in a particular context or situation,
mm,
that can, and then as we share, whether it's, let's say, relational elements of, like, how is healing wanting to happen, and what are we noticing in terms of how that's impacting in relationship, um, that each of us is bringing a kind of part of this bigger pattern. And we've talked about cymatics and kind of like how we can see the shape of a kind of frequency, how that is showing up. And as we connect to various principles or aspects or elements of healing, and we're able to share that together and tune into, like, how are we tuning into how relationally healing is wanting to happen at this time, then we can start connecting that inner and outer in a really natural flow,
yeah,
and understand how, something of, the principles of fractals, that all reality is kind of constructed fractally. So if we can tune into something, even if it's just two people talking, three people, a small group of people, we're tapping into a wider resonance that is, then we start amplifying that in the world, and it's those, small islands in the sea of chaos that can create new levels of coherence, right? So that is energetically, I think, what's possible.
I love that conception of it, that sort of multi-scalar resonance of healing, and tuning into that for ourselves, like locally, what we can be present to, is actually participating directly,
Yeah, absolutely.
not just in a cumulative way, like everyone takes care of their bit, then the sum of that will be, it's much more profoundly connected, at multiple scales, what we're tuning into, that, like, in the sense that healing is available, it's like it's
Yeah.
broadcast, it's there. And so
Mm.
tuning into that, and how that's relevant and resonant for us in a particular moment, in a particular context.
Mm.
Just to, like, story that a little bit, you've reminded me, or it's brought up, a recent experience of doing some volunteering, which I'd wanted to do for a while. And it was with Crisis Homeless Charity in the UK. And over Christmas, hotels are given to people to house them in that period, and they have volunteers just talking to those people and helping with food and various things. So I went to do that, and I had quite an interesting experience because he, one of my sort of personal experiences with healing is through addiction and drug addiction, and that becomes a bit of a lens of how I see broader crisis, that
Mhm.
sort of mechanism. So it's still quite a live sort of inquiry for me. And I was there at this place to sort of support people that were in much worse states of health than me, to look at it in that way. Um,
Mhm.
and so there was a sort of sensitivity for like not centering myself, kind of being there to serve. But actually, what everyone wants is for the volunteers to just treat everyone else, the guests, the homeless guests, as normal people,
Mhm.
um, and connect with them in that way. And what and because a lot of addiction is very visible in people in that situation, it's quite a sort of a live conversation, or available as a conversation. And I found, kind of to my surprise, that all the volunteers that I had shifts with, some from very wealthy families and backgrounds, some from very different economic tiers, much more working class, and very different parts of London, and the country. There was a connecting conversation with everyone, which was about addiction and suffering forms of addiction, whether it
Mhm.
was alcoholism in wealthy families or narcotics in other places,
Mhm.
and recovery from that. And so I just wanted to share that because I'm sort of taking in that idea that actually in that context, um, there's a suffering of addiction, and it kind of made its way into a larger pattern of the volunteers in the group. And those were
Yeah.
very healing conversations, for myself and others as
Mhm.
volunteers.
Mhm.
And somehow that I can see
Yeah.
retrospectively that was very much in resonance with
Mhm.
what many people were suffering, and that we were there to support as well. So that's a
Mhm.
sort of slightly long-winded anecdote. Uh,
No, but I think it illustrates something which, I feel when we see healing at work, it's like a form of memory. It's like um, there's something in the system that has a memory, like so, and in we see that in rivers, so polluted rivers that have been given a straight channel to flow down, and you get rid of that, and then all the nature comes back, the biodiversity, somehow it just finds its way back. And it almost feels like from your story, it's like actually these people have gone on their own journeys and somehow finding their way back to a place together where they can share and amplify that, and also cascade some of that back into the community that they're serving. um, and in that way I think healing is kind of homologous to narrative. There's a kind of there's a it's got a pattern that's like a narrative pattern.
mm,
Yeah, which is why I think that powerful stories can be so healing as well, because it's almost like I have this little hypothesis in my head, is I wonder how whether storytelling evolved as a way of almost processing or describing healing.
wow, wow. That lands so clearly with me as a theory, as an idea. And as you've talked about, healing as memory, healing as a reservoir of our knowledge, uh, it, our collective knowledge of experiences of healing that prepare us for adapting in the future. I can
Mm,
really see that with the transmission of story in pre-literate cultures, oral storytelling. It feels like a live ritual going on, like every
mm,
fireside storytelling being a reuptake of the memory of healing. And actually, when we think about moral stories, um, or many of the perennial sort of the kind of the seven basic plots, voyage and return, overcoming the monster,
mm,
these sorts of things
yeah.
are all about holing, aren't they? About
Mm,
becoming more whole, their processes of maturation. And you know the protagonist is in some situation which is full of
Mhm.
discomfort and resistance, and they have to overcome that. And
Mm.
then they have to
That's right.
accept that. They have to make sense of it, make meaning of it, become present to their circumstances. It
Mm.
would be very interesting to look over some stories through the lens of the qualities that you've talked about and the conditions for healing. I suspect that we would find many of them present.
Yeah. And then it helps you to reframe the experience of the challenge, the nature of the challenge, right? It's like life cares for me enough to let me experience this so I can grow. I think
Mhm.
is a way of uh doesn't always feel like that every day, of course, but there's something when we come into a different sort of relationship with this thing that ultimately is there to help our maturity and our growth, or whether it's in our own lifetime or beyond. So yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. That feels like a good place to kind of fold up this conversation for now. Life cares for me enough to let me experience this and help me grow, I think I heard you say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm I'm just going to link that with the kind of the phrase and the sort of larger frame of kind of cards for life and planetary health and thinking like Gaia. You've talked about, you know, the inner and outer flow of healing as well, and we've sort of spoken around sort of resonance and tuning into resonance as a way of sensing and attuning to that healing frequency. And more I'm learning to think of life as moving through us, and
Mm-hmm.
that flow kind of goes both ways. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and now I can weave and sort of fold healing into that conception.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for this conversation. It's
Thank
been very
you.
holding.
Yeah, it's gone very fast.
It has gone
Mm.
very fast, and I feel like we could keep talking for some time. But maybe we'll pause it here, and there's for sure more to say. Uh,
Mhm.
so um, thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this time and having this conversation.
Yeah.